ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthem of Trinidad and Tobago. Vice-Chancellor and Campus Principal, Professor Clement Sankat, Deputy Principal, Professor Rhoda Reddock, Their Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, members of senior management of the St. Augustine campus, CEO of Export TT and guest speaker, Mr. Adrian Theodore, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Dr. Heather Cato, Director of the Center for Language Learning, Dr. Beverly Ann Carter, President of the Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Mr. David Edwards, faculty of the St. Augustine campus, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good evening. My name is Amina Ibrahim Ali, and it is my pleasure this evening on behalf of the Language and Competitiveness Research Team, to guide you through the launch of the official Language and Competitiveness website. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our campus principal, Pro Vice-Chancellor Professor Clement Sankat, on stage to deliver his remarks on tonight's event.
Thank you very much, our chair, Dr. Amina Ibrahim Ali, members of the Diplomatic Corps, CEO of Export TT, Mr. Adrian Theodore, Deputy Campus Principal, Professor Rhoda Reddock, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Dr. Heather Cato, Director of the Center for Language Learning, Dr. Beverly Ann Carter. I want to recognize Ms. Sarah Carroll, who is our workshop facilitator and who is from the firm Go Global from the United Kingdom. Other colleagues of the St. Augustine campus from the Center for Language Learning, and other members of the Research, Development, and Impact Fund, specially invited guests. I should recognize any students who are present here this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you, and it is indeed with great pleasure I bring greetings to all of you as we launch the Language and Competitiveness website, which is an output of our Research, Development, and Impact Fund project entitled Languages and Competitiveness, Positioning Trinidad and Tobago for Sustainable Development, a project led by Dr. Beverly Ann Carter, who's the head of our Center for Language Learning. Today I welcome you to the St. Augustine campus wearing two hats. Firstly, as Pro Vice-Chancellor and Campus Principal, and secondly, and probably more importantly, as the Chairman of the UWI Trinidad and Tobago Research, Development, and Impact Fund, which we launched here a few years ago. But before I continue, we are still in the second week of the new year, and many of you I'm seeing for the first time since the new year began. And let me express my best wishes to all of you in this new year, to yourselves and your families, and to the institutions that you represent. Ladies and gentlemen, the launch of this website, and more broadly, the Spanglish project, is one that is extremely important in the broader context of Trinidad and Tobago's competitiveness. And let me add, or West Indian competitiveness. While English is our main language, here and in many other countries of the region, we must ask ourselves, are we limiting our trade capacity because of our inability to fully tap into non-English speaking markets? Dr. Carter and her team probe a similar question in their project. They're asking the question, are we trading and focusing on regions where English is the official language, where business can be conducted in English? And if so, are we losing opportunities to ramp up our competitiveness and promote sustainable development by understanding the impact of languages and intercultural competence on trade and exports? The simple answer to this question is perhaps a big yes. I think we may be losing opportunities to tap into other markets where English is not the dominant business language. If businesses in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean are to successfully tap into the very large South and Latin American markets, for instance, employees, and particularly export managers and leaders of companies, must of course have good language skills to achieve better results. In this context, it can be argued that linguistic competence can indeed create economic value and propel a country to be more competitive. Now is really an opportune time for businesses in Trinidad and Tobago, and particularly manufacturing enterprises, to really ramp up their own manufacturing and competitiveness as the country seeks to find enhanced ways of earning foreign exchange which we are losing as a result of declining prices in oil and gas. I can think of many opportunities for manufacturers in Central America. And those of you who would have visited Panama would have seen what a growing economy that is with the expansion of the Panama Canal. And Panama looks like a mini Hong Kong. And it's really a revelation when you visit that country. But so it's Costa Rica and Guatemala as potential examples of Spanish-speaking marketplaces in Central America that we should tap into, as well as the Dominican Republic. I recently had, thanks to the support of our dear ambassador from Cuba, I had an opportunity to visit Cuba recently. And there are tremendous and exciting possibilities for businesses to make a mark in Cuba. In fact, when I was in Cuba, at the same time there was a trade mission there, exactly at the same time, just by coincidence. And I had a chance to speak to them, and this was something that I referred to, the importance of getting in there early, and of course the need for learning Spanish to be successful in that marketplace. For us in the region, the English-speaking Caribbean, Cuba is a sister island But we need to be wary that next to Cuba, 90 miles away, is a large country where the second language is Spanish. That is the United States of America. And we need to therefore get in there early, because big American business, firmly competent in Spanish, can arrive in there very, very quickly and become very successful. We must bear in mind that we live in a globalized world, and as such, our citizens must become global citizens who are able to communicate across language and cultural variances. Language barriers must become a thing of the past for our country and our region, particularly for businesses which desire to enter the international market. And while Spanish is primary for us because we are in this Spanish-speaking environment, so would be languages emanating out of China and or India, for example, or even South Korea. Our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, recently addressed the language dilemma of the English-speaking Caribbean when he noted, and I quote, "We have maintained an educational system that does not make it mandatory for every child to speak Spanish and English. What kind of future are we imagining in this Caribbean world if our children are lost before translation? How can we imagine a Caribbean economic future without the fundamental of effective communication?" Close quote. This is why we at the UWI urge and encourage all our students to learn, at the very minimum, one foreign language. And as Dean of Engineering, I used to encourage my students to learn Spanish, engineering students, because that's an area where we can spread our engineering competitiveness into countries large and close to us. Petroleum engineering competence, for example, Portuguese in Brazil, or Spanish in Venezuela, Dutch in Suriname. All of these are petroleum producing and oil and gas producing countries. So we need to really encourage this. But language education should not begin at the UWI, but should be encouraged throughout our educational system, from early childhood education to higher education. And let me say, I think in Trinidad and Tobago we are making progress in Spanish, and I congratulate our governments for the work that they're doing to promote Spanish in Trinidad and Tobago and in our schools. And as I speak about the importance of language competence, I cannot help but also think about the good work of Professor Ian Robertson, a former professor in linguistics and a former Dean of Humanities and Education, who advocated very strongly for the need to understand the impact of language on national sustainable development. Today, I am therefore very, very happy, both as principal and as chairman of this Research, Development and Impact Fund, that our researchers are investigating and therefore responding to a critical developmental problem in Trinidad and Tobago and the region: the correlation between language and competitiveness. This is the type of project we must continue to encourage and pursue at the UWI and the wider region. Projects and research that will positively impact our economies and by extension the lives of the people of our region, driven by people with a truly multidisciplinary perspective. I must also mention how pleased I am to learn that this project has had a great deal of applied work. That is to say, that the project allowed for stakeholder engagement, which is precisely the type of interaction the Research, Development and Impact Fund was created to foster. This fund, established in 2012, was mandated to support a particular type of research endeavor within the context of the wider university agenda. The difference in this fund was that our research must be able to create impact in the societies in which we live. Our research must be able to quickly touch the lives of people. Our research, while being scholarly and academic, and we applaud that, our research must also be impacting. We believe that projects funded by this unique fund must go beyond academic outputs and find creative ways to encourage knowledge mobilization and uptake by those most likely to benefit from it. On this note, Dr. Beverly Ann Carter and her team must be commended for successfully conducting the workshop held previously on trading with China for the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. I do hope that similar workshops will be conducted for businesses interested in trading with other international markets, and they will do so in the near future as we continue to encourage knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer, and knowledge uptake for the benefit of all our stakeholders. In closing, I commend you, Dr. Carter, and your team, once again for the good work which you have done thus far. I do sincerely hope that many more businesses throughout our country and region will continue to encourage and engage our researchers so that they can begin to enter the international market, thereby making our economy and our country more competitive and more entrepreneurial. And with the old saying, charity begins at home, Spanish should be number one on our priority. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Campus Principal and Chairman of the RDI Fund. Next on the program this evening is a video presentation where members of this interdisciplinary research team share their reflections on the project. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back and relax and enjoy.
Beverly Ann Carter. I am project leader of the Language and Competitiveness project. When we're talking competitiveness, traditionally we think only of economics. We only look at the economic angle. There's research out there which says there are other things you can do to push competitiveness in a society. One of the things is a focus on how languages and intercultural competence help companies to export. And this is what we're hoping. This is the kind of impact we want to generate and to promote, a sensitivity to how, by using languages, companies can be more export ready and engage in different markets from the traditional ones. The name of the project is Language and Competitiveness, and the whole idea is that there are various ways in which a company can boost its competitiveness overall and boost its competitiveness ranking. And there's a lot of research showing that you can do that through languages. If you have a strategy for using languages and intercultural communication, those have been shown to boost economic competitiveness. And really, this is what the project is about. The project is about helping local manufacturers, helping local businesses understand that by using the tools of language, by using intercultural communication, you can export, you can engage with the world, not only the English-speaking world. The idea is the multilingual world, and that's what our project is about. So whether you're trading with China, whether you're trading with Panama, this is what we want you to understand, that there are tools that we can give you, strategies to help you increase your export. And it's exciting, it's dynamic, it's something that's very practical, very linked to how we see languages as benefiting the society at large.
My name is Dr. Michelle Rees, and I'm a former lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Institute of International Relations. My early involvement in this project involved conceptualizing the ways in which migration and population issues would have a bearing on a project such as Language and Competitiveness. And in the early stages, I was working with the director of the Center for Language Learning, Dr. Beverly Ann Carter. Once the project got underway, I became involved in the language audit, actually conducting interviews and distributing questionnaires for the migrants and getting a sense of the context in which they used either their native language or the foreign languages that they spoke. This was a really exciting part of the project, I think the most exciting part. Primarily because you were exposed to such a diverse range of migrants and the languages that they spoke, and also the context within which people used either their native language at home, in their work environment, and also the fact that so many people did not really master English but were able to get along pretty well with a minimum of proficiency in their respective environments.
I'm Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard. I'm a demographer, statistician by training, and I worked on the language audit component of the Language and Competitiveness project. It was indeed a great pleasure to work in this project where I provided critical skills in statistical analysis and data collection, and I am happy to know that the project did attain some benefit in filling the gap in our population, in providing data on our population composition, particularly gaps associated with the linguistic capability of our population. I was particularly excited by my engagement in Tobago, where there are a number of different foreign language speakers, and interacting with them and hearing of their insights and learning of their characteristics augured well in terms of how we may forge ahead as we advance this project and the aims of this project, particularly as in Trinidad and Tobago, population dynamics, and in particular population aging and eventual decline in the size of the population, where perhaps we will have more and more people coming from countries speaking languages other than English. It is incumbent on us to ensure that our citizenry, particularly the next generation, the younger ones, become more conversant in international languages other than English, especially if they have to engage in commerce, engage in training abroad, engage in industrial activity and whatever other foreign affairs matters that may advance, growth and development in keeping with sustainable development initiatives in a country such as Trinidad and Tobago.
Hi, my name is Bipaya Pari, and I was the Graduate Research Assistant on the Language and Competitiveness project since April 2014. My role involved questionnaire design, data collection, data analysis, and reporting. My background in statistics was an asset to the project. I was involved in all the sub-projects, but my greatest input was with the language audit. Coming out of that, the analysis revealed that there are 40 languages present in Trinidad and Tobago, and that a person who was born in a foreign country and now resides here can speak on average 3 languages. The results of the language audit is an indication of the deficit of language skills among Trinbagonians. Being on the project has even encouraged me to learn a foreign language, and it is my hope that the stakeholders see the need to expand the language skills of the wider society as it relates to competitiveness.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Landa Buell and I'm a specialist in second language acquisition research, specializing in Spanish. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about our sub-project. My sub-project or our sub-project was dealing with Spanish bilingual families who live in Trinidad and whose parental members, one of them at least, speaks Spanish as a native language. And therefore they have children who are bilingual or potentially bilingual of English and Spanish. We wanted to know how many of these families are and where are they mainly located. And we also wanted to know what is the real situation of their children, whether their Spanish is being lost because of the formal education, monolingual in English, formal education they are exposed to in the schools, or if their families are making an effort to keep the Spanish running in the family, and they read in Spanish and they are able to write in Spanish. So we did 2 questionnaires, a big one through internet, and then we chose a few families and we did interviews to these selected families and their children. What we found was that most of the parents are very, they do know that for their children being bilingual is very important and is an advantage, so they are trying their best. But their best is not enough because the children are losing their skills in Spanish, especially when it comes to some grammatical features and vocabulary that is not directly related to the home. And we believe that the key to this situation, the solution will be to have at least Saturday morning classes in Spanish for bilingual children, so that they can continue improving their Spanish at the same time that they learn English in the school. And well, these children are Trinidadian children, so they are really a resource of this country, and we believe the government will be doing a great investment by doing this. Thank you.
Hello, my name is He Ming. I'm the Chinese instructor at the Center for Language Learning, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. In the project of language and competitiveness, we are doing the sub-project named Trading with China. In our sub-project, Trading with China, we did some preliminary research and we got the profiles of those companies who are doing business with China. And then we send them questionnaires to find what kind of barriers and difficulties they have met in the past experience. After that, we developed guidelines to doing business with China, and we organized some workshops in TTMA to update and revise our guidelines. Now, we also created 6 podcasts entitled Quick Tips to Chinese Business Etiquette. It's a first of its kind project about China in Trinidad and Tobago. Based on outcome, we hope it provides a basic foundation for businessmen desirous entering the Chinese market.
I am Dr. James Bukari, and I lead the French sub-project under the Language and Competitiveness Project. The French sub-project deals with French language and culture and competitiveness broadly. Most specifically, it's an investigation into the value of French language and culture in the workplace in Trinidad and Tobago. The French language sub-project deals with the value of French language and culture in the workplace in Trinidad and Tobago. We used survey instruments and personal interviews to gather the data for the study. And from the participants that I interviewed, I gathered that their skills are underutilized. Therefore, my hope is that the study will trigger awareness in our society, so that the people in government, people in the corporate world, in the university itself, will get to see that resources that we have are underutilized, especially language resources, French language resources in particular. We have depended on English alone for too many years, and it's hurting us because English alone can no longer help us out, because we're in a global world and every country is competing with other countries, and those who have language skills are doing better than those who do not have the language skills they need for trade, commerce, diplomacy. I'm also hoping that more investment will be put into the study of the French language and culture, so that it will help our country to foster better relationships between us and the larger Francophone world.
What I would like to do now is briefly discuss some of the project outcomes and impacts. Basically, I will discuss what might change as a result of this project. Even if you've never heard the term Spanglish, I think you all intuitively understand exactly what it conveys. Remember, my title is Spanglish Outcomes and Impacts. You may even know someone who speaks Spanglish. The Language and Competitiveness Project allowed us to investigate this phenomenon by interviewing young mother tongue speakers of Spanish who were born or now reside in Trinidad and Tobago. We wanted to know, for example, whether these children are encouraged to abandon their mother tongue and focus on the language of schooling. While this is often seen as the common sense approach, language specialists and UNESCO policy documents recommend mother tongue maintenance. Moreover, persons are less likely to end up speaking Spanglish if there's support given to them to improve proficiency in both languages. Research suggests that bilinguals may take longer to achieve initial proficiency than their monolingual peers, but ultimately they will have the cognitive, linguistic, social, and economic advantages that accrue to multilingual speakers. Country competitiveness is obviously enhanced by having such a pool of multilingual speakers on which to draw. One outcome of the project, therefore, would be to develop an understanding among educators that a bilingual child is not a deficient monolingual. If we want to harness the capacity of our resident bilinguals for the future, we must reflect on whether their schooling is meeting their language needs. Generally speaking, Trinidad and Tobago has not really begun to grapple with the fact of a population in which a significant minority might have a language other than English as their main language. The national census certainly assumes an exclusive role for English. Our research team was not surprised to find Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic among the languages spoken in Trinidad and Tobago homes. But we were surprised to find 23 mother tongues and 40 languages among the 196 respondents of our language audit survey. The United Nations Statistics Division recommends that a national census should collect 3 types of linguistic data: data on respondents' mother tongue or language of early childhood, the language or languages most often spoken in their current home, And thirdly, the ability to speak one or more designated languages. Trinidad and Tobago does not collect any of these data. So what we set out to do in the language audit project, which of course my speech should have followed what went before, in that particular project, we attempted very ambitiously to get a sense of what is the reality in foreign languages in Trinidad and Tobago. But of course, you know, normally when this is done in developing and developed countries, you do that kind of research as applied research of census data. So the census already has that information, and then you could use that information in some kind of applied way. But that's not part of what we do in the Caribbean. In the English-speaking Caribbean, that's just not something that has occurred to us. We assume monolingualism, okay? The UK provides an interesting example about the importance of languages in economic terms. I use the UK as an example because, of course, English is the language of international business. It may surprise you to know that despite the dominance of English as the language of international business, there's deep concern among UK business and commercial interests about the economic disadvantages of monolingualism. Data show that the UK exports, no surprise, disproportionately to English-speaking countries because of a lack of language ability. The resulting loss of business is referred to as a tax on trade. And when I say the figure, I'm slightly dyslexic mathematically, but you'd have heard billion. The figure is estimated at 7.3 billion pounds annually, or 0.5% of the GDP. That's what the UK loses in terms of trade and export, because they're sticking to English-speaking markets. So that's the kind of research that exists, and that's what spurred this project on. A key area of competitive advantage for exporters depends on how well they understand and respond to market information. It is not surprising, therefore, that a study of 400 UK exporters found that companies with export managers who had good language skills, those companies achieved better results, as these export managers were more discriminating in conducting market research and more innovative in their decision-making. This is just one example of considerable research showing that linguistic and intercultural proficiency boosts export competitiveness and promotes international entrepreneurship. It is this kind of research which forced the UK to re-engineer their export strategies by drawing on the skills of someone like consultant Sarah Carroll, who is a consultant with UK Trade and Investment. So this was research. It was done by the academics. It was done by, one of the names is Professor Foreman Peck, who is at Cardiff Business School, who is an economist. He's not a language economist because there's such a profession, but he's an economist. And he worked with the UK Treasury. He was an advisor to the UK Treasury Department. And they did the statistical, quantitative, blah, 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 and it was determined that the UK is losing, you laugh, well, 7.3 billion per annum. So obviously you had to respond to that kind of information, and the idea was that we need to rethink how export is done, and this is where people like Sarah come in. So the decision was taken, we really need to look at why we're not reaching external markets. And of course, none of us in the room will be surprised that if some kind of research were to be done in Trinidad, we'd come up with similar figures. We're simply not exporting beyond our small, intimate CARICOM region. And I remember when I was putting together this little piece, I found something, and it was interesting, but I said I didn't want to say too much, but I'll say it now. It was by a researcher, a Trinidadian researcher based in the UK. And he said that it seems that over the past 10 or so years, we have, in terms of our export strategy, we have narrowed our outlook because we are focusing only on CARICOM when we are thinking exports. And I found 2 clicks away, I found in the same magazine, this was the magazine put out by the High Commission in London. In the same magazine, there was a report which alluded to a speech by the president of Haiti when he was the chairman of CARICOM. This was in 2013. And the president of Haiti said, when is CARICOM going to make French an official language? There are 10 million Haitians. So we are talking CARICOM, but CARICOM really is no longer even only English speaking, and yet that's kind of where we are looking to do our trade and not really expanding our horizons. We really need to move out of the English-only box. So, to continue. So to draw the strands of what I said earlier, the main outcome of the project was to promote a better understanding about the humanistic and economic value of linguistic and intercultural competence, and in doing so, to raise local awareness about the link between language and competitiveness. We conducted a successful workshop on trading with China for the TTMA, and have discussed the possibility of mounting similar workshops for companies planning to explore Latin American markets. We engage with regional and international tourism stakeholders in Tobago. We engage with demographers and other technocrats from regional central statistical offices in Guyana. In our most recent activity, we worked with the Ministry of the Modern Languages Curriculum Division of the Ministry of Education and French and Spanish language teachers on a competition for 4th to 6th formers. Students were asked to submit essays, spoken word pieces, digital or traditional posters, or a short group film on the theme Languages for Life. This morning, some of the prize winners and other students attended a lecture right here on the theme of languages and competitive advantage. And it's a little disappointing to see the adult reaction because the student reaction this morning was fantastic. We had a full auditorium. We had, by our estimation, we had somewhere between 300 and 350 secondary school students. We were absolutely delighted that in addition to the traditional schools, schools with their private buses and stuff, we had a little knot of students who came with their teachers traveling by the PTSC bus from Toko Composite. Toko Composite was in the house this morning. That thrilled us immensely. So we are taking the show on the road tomorrow. We are going to go to Naparima College in San Fernando, and we're going to do the address for students at Naparima College. But it was really quite nice to see the energy, the enthusiasm. The competition got off to a slightly late start, but we had some real champions in the Ministry of Education, Foreign Languages Curriculum Division, who really pushed and pulled, and we had teachers of French and Spanish, and the students produced really nice pieces of work, and we would love very much to make this, if not an annual, a biennial event, that we have an activity around languages, purely around languages. And this was the thing. I mean, the language teachers, they were just beaming because kind of they feel like a neglected lot. Nobody really takes them on, and they were just all so delighted, and it was really, really nice. It was a live stream, so it's going to be up on the website when we finish the website. Anyhow, to finish my speech. So the students, I talked about that. What she did this morning, and of course what I asked her to do, because you go via the heart, so she talked about her own experience as an entrepreneur. This is Miss Carol, who has successfully combined languages and business to build Grow Global Limited. The primary purpose of her visit, however, is to conduct a series of masterclasses on website optimization for international trade. This is, of course, another project that speaks directly to the competitiveness bottom line. These workshops will help participants improve their market intelligence through a better understanding of the global digital marketplace. The primary beneficiaries of the workshops will be those currently exporting to international markets or planning to enter such markets. Or even internally, we have UE staff, marketing and communications, also took part in the workshop. Export TT is our partner for the web optimization workshops. So briefly, the project has interacted with a variety of stakeholders, both on the policy side, the ministries, the Export TT, as well as schools, as well as the commercial sector, and I think we've had a pretty broad stretch. In conclusion, I'd like to do like the principal and talk about a statement made by my colleague, Professor Ian Robertson, in which he called for a better understanding of Trinidad and Tobago's linguistic resources, their significance, and their centrality to national development. The Language and Competitiveness Project has responded to that charge by exploring the relationship between language and competitiveness. The project has positioned the Center for Language Learning as host department of the Language and Competitiveness Project to more forcefully engage in the socioeconomic development of the country and fulfill one of the goals of the entrepreneurial university by putting knowledge to use and creating new knowledge. This is indeed research with impact. We looked forward to continuing our engagement with policymakers and stakeholders in the business community. We hope that our project and our continuing collaboration with stakeholders will inform national and regional policymaking. I must have skipped something in my speech because some ways there should have been a sentence saying that one of the impacts we hope from the project is that the next time the country does a census, we'd be collecting information, linguistic data, because that is, a big flaw in, well, not a flaw, a deficiency in what we have now. So finally, I hope you will go to the project website and explore the project materials and give us your feedback on what you find there. Thank you, gracias, merci, and sheshe.
Thank you, Dr. Beverly Ann Carter, Director for the Center for Language Learning and Head of the Research Team. Continuing along the theme of competitiveness and positioning Trinidad and Tobago for sustainable development, let us hear the export perspective. That is export with 2 T's. I now welcome on stage Mr. Adrian Theodore, CEO of Export TT, the National Export Facilitation Organization of Trinidad and Tobago, to deliver his remarks. Mr. Theodore.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. While I dread saying those words, all protocols having been observed, I actually have caught out to the corner of my eye too many luminaries not on my original list for me to go through my original list for fear of skipping anyone of importance, all of importance, of course. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Carter for her, well, I had her on my document here for her excellent presentation and talk, but for her excellent talk on the findings of the Language and Competitiveness Report. Now, I've joined the Export TT team very recently, a couple months ago, and I have a very bad reputation among my staff for asking them to help me in the preparation of speeches, vetting wonderful accompanying graphs, and then having conversations during the day and writing completely different speeches. So because it's a brand new year, I would like to stick with that tradition this evening. First of all, let me say that when Dr. Carter contacted me for Export TT with the idea that Export TT would be a part of this project, I put aside all semblance of executive presence and started the email with a smiley face, something I always complain to my younger brothers and sisters about using in formal communication. But I was so excited because what she was describing fits so perfectly with not just the mandate of Export TT, which is the development of our non-energy sector, especially our non-energy export sector, that I really couldn't help it. That's really what came out of me, was that smiley face, which I hate. So I'd like to talk this evening very briefly. I'm a brief speaker. I'd like to talk very briefly this evening about 3 recent conversations that I had and the importance of the language and competitiveness link through those conversations. Recently, Professor Sankat started by speaking about his recent visit to Cuba. I also visited Cuba for FIHAV, and I see the Cuban ambassador here tonight, sir. Recently visited Cuba for FIHAV, which is their trade fair in November. And we carried 14 local firms, exporting firms, potential exporting firms to Cuba. 22 persons from those 14 firms. And we created an opportunity for what you call a matchmaking session. So instead of a firm normally having to go on its own and find all the different buyers, people at a particular level that actually have the ability and the authority to purchase, we set up these matchmaking sessions where our firms could come in, have 45-minute meetings, etc., and we would help in terms of the follow-up after these meetings. At those meetings, something very interesting happened. I sat through the majority of the meetings. There were a lot, as you could very well imagine. I sat through the majority of the meetings because my intention was to see the key areas in which we needed to develop our ability to negotiate. I wanted to see how our firms stood in terms of their ability to negotiate and have these discussions. I've spent 14 years in the export arena, right? I worked for Bermuda's Group. There's a short, this is not an advertisement, there's a short background. I spent 14 years in the export arena. I worked for Bermuda's Group as a regional export manager for quite a long time, managed a number of markets for their companies. And one of the things I would have noticed is there is a direct connection between the ability of persons having that initial discussion and the eventual success of a particular, not just negotiation, but a particular relationship, right? The ability and that skill. So I was really trying to look at the competitive aspect related to the ability to negotiate. And the importance of language jumped out at me because in situations where we had an interpreter, and our interpreters were fantastic, right? In the situations where we had an interpreter, I could tell that a relationship wasn't being created between the buyer and the potential seller. There was a clear gap. And I think that sometimes we miss the fact that the language, importance of language, is not just the ability to understand the specific words. It's not the ability to translate what is being said. When we understand the language, we convey a certain level of respect. We actually are able then to sit after these formal negotiations and chat about your kids, about the weather, tell the Cubans how beautiful the place is, and you are so excited about being able to run every morning, and it's scenic, etc., that we focus so much on the translation part that the competitiveness part really is only connected to the ability to translate. But it's really, in my opinion, more important in terms of the ability to create a connection. It's very, very big. I was based in Guyana and Suriname for a number of years. In Suriname, the majority of the retailers, as you may or may not know, are Chinese. They speak 4 different types of Chinese: Hakka, Cantonese, Mandarin, and I forget what the 4th type is. And there is this gap. In fact, the Surinamese, I don't know if we have any Surinamese here, the Surinamese say that the Chinese speak calculator. Because you come to purchase something, put the price in, it's in the calculator, that's it. Salesmen can negotiate for additional space in the outlet, they can merchandise your products. There is a huge gap between the person selling and the person buying. And I see it all throughout the region, not just in Suriname, but I also see it in Latin America as well. And it is a serious competitive edge that we are missing. It's something in our arsenal that we do not have. So that's one conversation, which was the conversations I saw in Cuba at these negotiations. There was another conversation I had this morning, which prompted the disposal of my formal speech. I had a conversation with Mr. Clive Vokes. Now, Mr. Vokes is a former head of the trade promotion agency in Wales, in the UK. And we were chatting about something totally unrelated. And as if he had been spying on my emails to Dr. Carter, he started to talk about competitiveness. And he went into the fact that the UK had done some research, and my paw was raised, and I said my prepared speech doesn't stand a chance at this point in time. And I remembered Dr. Carter's statistic, $7.3 billion pounds, with a B. And my eyes opened wide, because my job, and the job of Export TT, is to create a level of competitiveness far and beyond what we have incrementally tried to create over the last couple decades. What I tell my team is that we are in an age where we need to seek exponential answers in terms of our growth. Incrementalism will not work for us. At a stage when, within one single year, price of your oil could go from $150-something to $30-something, you cannot be seeking growth at a 1% rate. It is ridiculous. The math doesn't work out. Therefore, we need to find ways of leapfrogging over stages of development, accelerating through stages of development. If ever there was a time for academia, the private sector, and the government to have really practical conversations about ways of developing, I think if this isn't the time, I don't know when is the time, to be quite honest. So in having that conversation with Clive Vokes, he also spoke about micro multinationals. And I mentioned to him I had been reading recently, I had a conversation with someone overseas about firms that are born global, firms that do not need to use the local market as a springboard toward entry to foreign markets. And something jumped into my head. Micro multinationals and born global firms have something that make them very different from our traditional firms, whether transnational, etc. And that's different in terms of the way they look at the export markets, the way they look at the world. The world seems small to them. It isn't scary. And one of the main things I have found, and just to give a little background before I talk about the main things I have found, having worked within the context of a group of companies, there were different levels of export readiness within the group. So therefore, it was very clear to me that we needed to find ways for the more experienced companies in the group to support the companies that are now entering particular markets. So we did a sort of, well, unofficially we call it the baby program, but we know they would be insulted by that, so we call it something more technical. But we had this program where we would get the more experienced firms to basically chaperone the new firms, the infant exporters within the group. And when I came over to Export TT a couple months ago, I decided that I think we should try a pilot project with this. And we're actually just starting it. We've had conversations with some of the larger firms. And in my mind, the purpose of the chaperone would be to show someone, to get over these simple logistical humps of going into a market for the first time. So introductions, places to eat. In Latin America, places to eat is a very important piece of information to have. And good hotels, etc., etc. But when I was speaking to the quote-unquote infant exporters, one of the first things that kept jumping out at me wasn't a lack of competence. There was a lack of competence in some ways, but there was a lack of confidence. And a lot of that lack of confidence came from, whether persons were willing to admit it or not, came from a lack of mastery of the language in the country that they were going. There was this fear that I would be caught there and I wouldn't be able to tell people what I need, and I would look stupid. Because you go into some of these countries and the kids speak 4 languages. They ask you, in English. Even I went to Suriname and they're asking me in Taki Taki, do you speak Taki Taki? I say, nah, me not talk Taki Taki. And they ask you in Dutch, and they ask you in Spanish, and they ask you in French. So now you're a very accomplished businessman, and you go into this foreign country, and this person is rattling through, this young person is rattling through 4 languages. There is a fear there. And this fear, and it seems a very small thing, but it's I think it's something a little bigger than we actually admit. And it just sprung to me that this lack of mastery, and Dr. Carter spoke about the research recently and the questions that were asked by the Haitian president, was it? About why we say trapped within CARICOM. And CARICOM has been very good to us. But there is such a thing called drowning in honey. And I'm speaking very honest, open, and plain speaking here. Something I learned at Bermuda. It's called HOPS, honest, open, and plain speaking. Speaking very HOPS here. That there is something called drowning in honey. And CARICOM has been so good to us, and they speak the same language. And the culture is very similar. That we were living in a fantasy that somehow the CARICOM market is an export market. And the CARICOM market, ladies and gentlemen, is not an export market. Because a lot of the issues that you face trying to get extra regionally, you do not have in CARICOM. And one of those big issues is our language. So that was the second conversation with Mr. Clive Oakes. And the very last conversation was with a member of my staff recently. We have these things called Breakfast with the CEO. I couldn't come up with a more clever name. Sorry. Couldn't come up with a more clever name, so I called it what it actually was. So on some Fridays, being a new member of staff, I would use the Fridays to have breakfast with multiple members of the team from different departments. Because it's a very good way to generate ideas, to get comfortable, to have conversations. And one of the members of staff mentioned a book that they had read recently called Smart Cuts. And it was so intriguing, I picked up the book. Picked up meaning, went to Amazon and downloaded it, right? And the book spoke about exactly what I was looking for. Ways to jump over levels of development, ways to speed through traditional levels of development, not through shortcuts, not by finding an underhanded way or actually not gaining the benefits of going through the process, but smart cuts. There are ways in which we make things more difficult than they have to be because they've been traditionally difficult. And I want to mention one of those ways, technology. And that's why this is such a fantastic project in terms of what I have in mind. Too many of us look at technology as a toy rather than a tool still. Even after all the statistics on how many people are online, after all the statistics on the importance of social media, we are seeing that the largest hotelier, more or less, in the world doesn't own any rooms, right? We see Airbnb, and they're worth billions and billions of dollars. We are seeing Facebook with billions and billions of dollars. How many books do they actually own? We are seeing Amazon.com, billions and billions of dollars. And even though we are seeing the importance of the technology, we are seeing billionaire after billionaire in the United States and all over the world talking about the fact that they are trying to find innovative ways, using balloons and drones and whatever, to increase the level of connectivity in the world, to bring on additional billions of folks onto the internet. We are seeing all of this, but so many of us still see the technology as a toy rather than a tool because it's new to us. And again, it comes back to the whole mindset of the micro multinationals and the go global. There are among us people who actually are not intimidated by what exists outside. And they pick up the languages very quickly, they pick up the culture very quickly, they pick up the technology very quickly. My question and my challenge to Dr. Carter is how do we take initiatives such as this and build a certain level of sustainability into them? We tend to go through a boom-bust cycle in terms of our focus as Trinbagonians. And the boom-bust cycle is directly related to the price of oil. And I mentioned something to someone earlier. Okay, switch off the camera for this particular part. I mentioned something to someone earlier today. I said one of the worst things that could happen to Trinidad and Tobago right now is for the price of oil to go up to $50. Because everybody will say, whoa, we're in the clear, guys. That's it. Carnival is on. You know, let's go for the more expensive. Because God is a Trini, apparently. But I don't know, he took his eye off the oil price for a moment, but he'll pay attention to it in a while. But we need to build levels of sustainability into what we're doing and have a level of seriousness, because we are in a cycle, yes. But I have a theory with respect to the cycle. I have a theory. It's my personal theory. It's not Export TT's theory, but I'll tell you anyway, even though I'm here representing Export TT. My theory is we are at a point in a cycle where there are so many macroeconomic factors mitigating against the price of oil returning to where it was, that we really have no excuse if we don't act this time. Things are so clear now that we are not in one of our traditional cycles, that we are really, what is the professional term I need to use at this very elevated forum? We are really playing the fool if we just go through that normal boom and bust in terms of our focus on technology, etc., and skills that will allow us to be competitive. You know? So I really see tonight as one of those smart cuts that one of the members of my staff pointed out to me. And we are joining two smart cuts together. One is an understanding of the language, and one is the use of the technology. So, and the language connects in terms of heart. It's a very deep connection. The technology allows us to get a certain width. We can connect to a lot of people at the same time. We had, and this is the last story I have, I'm apparently infamous for stories, right? We, Export TT, we conducted, what should you call it? We hosted an event in October of last year called In by TT. It's called an Inward Buyers Mission. We were trying to find ways of bringing interesting sellers and interested buyers together in the most efficient way, cost-effective in terms of time, etc. So what we did is we actually sought out buyers in potential markets. So we would find people that would distribute products that we had in different markets, and we found exporters in Trinidad and Tobago that had capacity and interest in particular markets. We brought in the buyers, and we did the same thing we did in Cuba, where we set up the matchmaking sessions, we had translators, etc., etc. So in the space of 2 days, the average exporter met with our 17 buyers over a 2-day period. They made connections, etc. And the thing I want to mention with respect to InBuyTT is this. In sourcing the buyers, we would contact someone and say, look, we're interested in you coming to Trinidad and Tobago, having meetings with our exporters. We have some potential products, etc., etc. The first thing they would do, obviously, is they would go to the internet. And I remember going to the internet to see what my potential buyers would see. And I remember breathing very deeply, saying an internal prayer, and saying we need to address this. We need to address the face of TNT online, etc. Again, that's why my smiley face to Dr. Carter when she asked for us to be a part of this. It's a very practical project and exercise. I look forward to the work this week, and I really look forward to us building a level of sustainability into it, and any way that Export TT could assist going forward, please feel free to give me a call. Thank you.
Good evening. I am clearly not Vidya Haru. This is Vidya Haru, who is a final year student in voice at the Department of Creative and Festival Arts. She's my student, and Dr. Carter requested a piece in one of the languages of the Center for Language Learning. This evening we have chosen German, and the particular piece that we're doing is Zweinung by Richard Strauss, which translated into, it's a very short piece, but translated from the German, it simply means, and it's appropriate for this evening, it means dedication.
zwischen Hoch und Abends diesen Wesen und desegnetest den Trank, aber Dank. Und bist vollst darin die Bösen besiegst, was ich dir gewesen, heilig ins Herzen sagt. Aber
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols respected. My name is Avian Daly, and I have the privilege of revealing the official Language and Competitiveness website to you. In the next few minutes, I will walk you through the main elements, although as you will see that the website is still under construction. The website basically is a repository of all the project's activities, including the list of conferences at which the individual sub-projects were presented, conference abstracts, the profiles of the research team, along with video tutorials on cultural tips on doing business with China. So as you can see, the layout is quite simple. We have our mission, our section on Meet Our Project Team, which contains the profiles, brief descriptions of each of the members of the project team, along with their images. In the media section of the website, here we've provided access to the tutorial videos on quick tips to Chinese business etiquette. And one of our main accomplishments is this language map that we have created based on our findings of the language audit project. So when the website is made public, users will be able to scroll by clicking on certain points on the website. We'll be able to access information about the different languages that are spoken either as a mother tongue or as a second language in the various regions. So this is possible for both Trinidad and Tobago. These, of course, are just preliminary findings, and so what we plan to do is add to the data that currently exists. This is an overview of the website as it stands. Thank you.
As we come to the end of this evening's proceedings, the project team would like to thank the following people and units. Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor, Professor Clement Sankat, our Deputy Principal, Professor Rhoda Reddock, members of the Diplomatic Corps, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, especially visitors to the campus, Mr. Adrian Theodore, CEO of Export TT, and his staff, in particular, Ms. Deborah Hoyt Redman, Ms. Maria Padilla Benjamin, Ms. Natalie Richards, and Ms. Renee Solomon. Ms. Celia Gibbons, Colin Sorias, and Sheldon Reyes, our graphic designer responsible for the logo. Colleagues in education, especially Ms. Ingrid Kemchand, Ms. Alicia Gordon, Ms. Nadine Joseph Demi, Ms. Shamila Jacob. Ms. Sarah Carroll, Managing Director of Global Limited, responsible for conducting our workshops. Dr. Dawn Marie Defoe Gill, Campus and University Director of Marketing and Communications, and his staff, in particular, Ms. Winell Gregorio, Ms. Maria Macmillan, Ms. Renata Sankar Jaimangal, Ms. Sophia Fonzo, and Ms. Chanel Glasgow. Mr. Nazir Aladdin, Campus Information Officer, and the staff of SITS, especially Mr. Tariq Khan, Mr. Christopher Thomas. Colleagues in the bursary, especially Mr. Andre Tate, Mr. John Ramnanan, Ms. Nisa Maraj, and Mr. Rohan Madri. Ms. Louise and Bryce and the RDIF Fund team, staff at the Office of the Campus Principal, especially Betty McComey, Dr. Deborah Coriat Patton, and Ms. Tessa Horn. Dean Heather Cato and the staff at FHE, in particular Mr. Kevon Ramsawak of the Film Unit, Ms. Bernice Thomas and the staff of the Learning Resource Center, Director and staff of the Division of Facilities Management, Director and staff of Campus Security, Tony Narain and the staff at the CLL, Ms. Vidya Haru of the Department of Creative and Festival Arts for the entertainment, and of course her accompaniment by the head of the Department of Creative and Festival Arts, Mr. Jessel Murray, and finally, Gemma's Catering. Thank you.
Mr. Theodore, thank you for coming. Would you come? Thank you for sharing your time with us. This is a small token of our appreciation. Mr. Theodore. I'd like two young ladies to come forward. They're the behind-the-scenes people, but Avian Daly and Bipaya Parry, without whom the project really would have been impossible. Avian and Bipaya, where are you? They didn't know they were going to be called, so I have to pull them out from where they are. Bipaya has been an excellent graduate research student. She's doing her PhD with Dr. Saint Bernard. She's presented, 3 conferences so far, and she's well on her way to being a solid researcher. Avian Daly is the contract officer research at the Center for Language Learning and has really been the anchor for this project, because before the project funding was released and we needed to get going, we needed someone to do things, and Avian has been that for the project. So I would like to thank them personally on behalf of the project team, but personally because they're the ones who have walked the walk. So Avian and Bipaya, thank you very much. I'm sorry to embarrass you like this because this is not their kind of thing.